Well, thank you everybody for joining us for the GenSpect Fall Expert Series, speaking with college employees and a variety of experts on different topics and the ways that colleges can support gender nonconforming and trans-identified students, including desisters and detransitioners. And in our first of the fall series for GenSpect, we have with us today our expert, Corinna Cohn. Corinna was diagnosed with gender identity disorder at about age 15 and pursued gender transition treatments around age 17. Now no longer 17 years old, maybe a little older than that. Corinna is now a co-host of the excellent podcast called Heterodorx, which I highly recommend. I never miss it. And has also written extensively about life experience and personal narrative about transsexualism and experiences with transitioning as a younger person in the Washington Post, among other outlets. Corinna is also active in the organization GC-CAN, Gender Care Consumer Advocacy Network, and also serves on the advisory board for RIME, organization Rethink Identity, Medicine, Ethics. So today, Corinna and I are going to host a question and answer, which I'd love to get kicked off with just turning the floor over to Corinna to just give opening thoughts and background, and then I will jump in. We had some people submit questions ahead of time, and we have, it looks like, some questions coming in on the Q&A function on Zoom here. If you'd like to submit additional questions, you don't have to wait till the end of a presentation or a stopping point. Anything that's occurring to you, don't use the chat feature, but do use the Q&A feature here on Zoom, and we will catch those questions and get to them. So without further ado, Corinna, so good to be here talking with you today.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you for that excellent introduction. As Candace said, my name is Corinna Cohn. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my mindset when I was a teenager, and maybe retrospectively think about what factored into my decision making at the time, and what I would recommend to other people who are in a similar path right now as they consider their decisions about whether, what sort of identity things that they want to pursue. So going back to when I was a teenager, I was growing up in the 80s. I turned 15 in 1990. So that was 1990 was pretty close to the peak of the AIDS epidemic crisis. At that time, culturally, there were not really, if you're going to ask, like, who's a famous gay person that you know about, somebody probably would have said, well, I think Liberace's gay. But there weren't really a lot of people who were out and gay. I think maybe Boy George might have been somebody said, oh yeah, I think Boy George is gay. But it really culturally was not acceptable to be gay. And even within my own family, I have an uncle who is gay and was accepted by the family. But I think this is probably pretty typical. Even if you have a gay family member, that's not something that your family would say, oh, being gay is great. It was more like, oh, we love your uncle anyway. Not we love him because he's part of the family, and we love everybody in the family. But it was like, yeah, he's got this fault, but you know, we still love everybody in our family. It was more like that. And for my own part, I didn't have a very good relationship with my father, and I don't have any older brothers, and didn't have any close male family members who really helped me understand anything about masculinity or being a man. I was often picked on in school for various reasons. Most of it could be boiled down to is that I wasn't very good at the social stuff. And that probably makes it a lot easier for you to be picked on. When I was about in middle school, I got really fixated on this idea that if I wasn't a boy, that if I could instead be a girl, that a lot of the things that were very difficult for me would be a lot easier. And this was about the time that I started puberty maybe a little bit later than average, but within the normal range. But as I started getting a little older and a little bit towards high school, I realized I like that whole time, like you're supposed to, if you're a young man, you're supposed to start developing an interest in girls, and I didn't. And as part of this idea of myself that if I could only be a girl, it was a lot easier to understand through that lens why I might have some attraction to men. It's because clearly, if you are a girl and you're attracted to men, that's very natural. That's normal. That's how it's supposed to be. And that sort of built on my fixation of wanting to change my gender. So while I was experiencing some romantic attraction to some of my friends and some of my classmates, I did not interpret that as a gay attraction at all. I reworked that or transformed that into what is, in retrospect, not very reasonable or rational, but I transformed that into I had a crush on the boys that I liked, and I would like to become the sort of woman that they would be attracted to. Not realizing that in several of the cases, the boys that I was interested in, that after high school, they came out as gay anyway. I guess it's maybe early built-in gaydar of some sort. So I transitioned when I was, started medical transition when I was 18, had a sex reassignment when I was 19. And from that point, I felt like I was finished with transition and I would be able to start pursuing relationships. And several, like that same year that I had sex reassignment surgery, I was having relationships with men. And it was actually terrible because with sex reassignment surgery, there is considerable rearrangement of your genitals, period. But whenever you're doing that sort of extensive surgery on an area that has such delicate nerves, what you should expect in general is that you're going to lose sensation and particularly erotic sensation. And one of the things that I didn't understand at the time about vaginoplasty is that it is pretty normal. I don't know if it's more typical than not, but it's pretty normal that males who have vaginoplasty are not going to be able to enjoy intercourse with a man through that mechanical means. And I still identified as a woman. I still was trying to put myself into that social role as a woman. And it created a lot of internal conflict with me for numerous reasons. But as it relates to relationships, one of the biggest reasons is that when I would date a man and we were getting along pretty well, that man would not want me to be part of his social life at all. He didn't want his friends to know. He didn't want his family to know. The places that we would go if there's going to be any public displays of affection would be places that were a little out of the way. And it became very obvious that the thing that was happening in these relationships was not a healthy meeting of equals who were trying to get something out of a partnership or relationship, but rather that I was becoming involved with men who had a it's more accurate to say a fetishistic interest in me as a transsexual. So while I was trying to find love and companionship and a meeting of equals, and something that we could support each other and love each other and have a relationship beyond the physical part. That's not what the men who were interested in me wanted. And I was still thinking of myself as a woman at the time, even though I'm not. And it was just really confusing. It created a lot of dissonance. So let me, that's some context. So just picture that for a second. Going backwards a little bit. Teenager who convinces himself that he is a girl, pursues medical treatments to become a woman, experiences adulthood and all of the relationships that he's in as not as a gay man, but as a transsexual, and then gets into his 40s, me, and starts to say, well, what can I salvage at this point? If I want to have a relationship with somebody, I want somebody who's going to see me not as a sexual object, not as something to fulfill a sexual urge, but somebody who's going to be my partner. So realistically, what is that going to be? It's has to be a man, because I don't want to have a relationship with a woman. It's got to be somebody who has more than just a fetishistic interest in me and who I am, and has to be somebody who regards me as male. So what does that mean practically? It means that I'm trying to find a partner at this point who is gay and is not ashamed about it, like I was as a teenager, and is willing to take me as I am, despite the fact that I've been surgically transformed into something that not all men would be willing to recognize as another man. So that is where we are right now. And I am not the only person who is going through this type of experience. I've been talking to a number of other young men who started transition even earlier than I did, who are realizing that even though it can be, there might be some parts of being in this world as trans, or people treating you like you're a woman, that might actually be very fun. That's not actually a way to actually be in the world permanently and connect with people and build actual solid relationships, or even really to build your identity around. It's a house built on sand. And whereas we would have opportunities to at some point, if we had been young gay men, we would have had opportunities to meet people on a similar track, or meet men who might be a little bit more experienced, and help us in culture ourselves as gay men. We didn't get any of that. And so we are people who've been medically transformed to be feminized with estrogen and other surgeries. And we are trying to figure out how to find relationships and partners with people that we're attracted to without having any form of being in gay culture at all. It's more accurate to say we're same-sex attracted males than we are gay men, because we're just not in the gay scene. So this is part of the challenge that I'm working through currently, and I am here in some sense to represent that this is a thing that's happening, and that having this sort of same-sex attraction when you're young and you feel like you have a difficult time relating to men, which I did, and a lot of my other trans brothers, I guess we could say, have also had these same sort of problems. when you feel like you've been alienated from manhood and you're still attracted to men, then what do you do? Transition sounds like a very promising path, especially as it's marketed right now, because there's this promise that is made that you can become a beautiful woman. And what they do is they take the most archetypical transitioners, the ones who appear most feminine, which it usually involves numerous surgeries and hormones, of course, and voice training so that you can speak in that higher register, which I don't have to do anymore. And like all of this stuff, this artificiality to build up this image, so that you can replicate the types of like hyper feminized caricatures that men are supposed to find attractive, so that in the hopes that you're able to find a man who will treat you well. And it's a little bit bonkers. So that's a little bit of background about me, my being a young same-sex attracted person that got pulled into the route of transition. I noticed, Candace, while I was talking, that some of the Q&A questions that had been previously submitted are now in an answered state. So I don't know if any of these are ones that we want to go back and review.
Probably, because I was looking at one that is getting at the idea of talked about, being 19 and now in your 40s. So assume a couple of decades change. When you look at society generally and try to step back and evaluate any kind of progress, society maybe focus here in the US has made toward more acceptance of same-sex attraction and less, at least overt homophobia. Do you think that say teenagers today who find themselves struggling with same-sex attraction have an easier or different road ahead of them, less likely, just the same likely to be maybe confused or questioning, well, does this mean that I was actually meant to be a woman instead of a man, or does this mean I'm just gay and myself and others just have to deal with that?
Well, you're the attorney, so hopefully you've got this memorized. I was going to try to Google it briefly, but when was Obergefell?
That I think was 2015.
2015?
So it's still pretty fresh.
Yeah, it was. I think that was about the peak of it being an open environment for young gay and lesbian people, because there was a lot of social attention on the question of legalizing gay marriage. There were a lot of celebrities that were in support of it. It was something that you saw on TV. There were conservatives and liberals who were both making arguments in favor of legalizing gay marriage, or in some cases of civil partnerships. But in any case, there was a lot of social acceptance. Even it might be hard for people to recall, but even as recently as 2008, Barack Obama, when he was campaigning, was against gay marriage, unambiguously against gay marriage, and so was Hillary Clinton. So in the course of about 7 years, there was a huge amount of social change and social acceptance. That was probably the best time as a young person to come out. So
that's arguably a short window, because
it was.
Yeah.
Because the attention turned to the gender identity. Mm-hmm. So I had got to spend a fair amount of time recently with Ben Appel, who is a writer in New York and a gay man. And he was relating some of the experiences that he's had in a college setting, where despite the fact that when he was a child, he was gender nonconforming. Nevertheless, he is Caucasian and he's male. And currently, the being a gay white male is considered to be, you're male, so you're an oppressor. I know that's simplifying things a little bit, but there are some people who think simply, right? So he might be able to be in defend himself in an argument against an accusation like that, but he's been in environments where he's had to. And I've heard this from other gay and lesbian women in an academic setting, that if you are what they call cis, which is not trans, that automatically puts you on one side of a duality that's a oppressor-oppressee duality. And what we've seen since 2015 is that more and more men and women who had up to that point described themselves as gay, more and more are men are calling themselves he, they, and women are calling themselves she, they, because it has some sort of protective feature to describe yourself as non-binary, because that makes you not cis anymore. And there's this pressure to trans yourself socially, not necessarily medically, but to have a social identification as trans, merely to change your position on that cis trans scale. And I don't think that this is good for anybody at all, but I think it's particularly bad for gays and lesbians, because throughout all of our history, through the Western history, I feel like I should put some boundaries on that. In our lifetimes, at least in our lifetimes, to be gay was to be gender nonconforming. To be lesbian is to be gender nonconforming. And the idea that you could persuade gays and lesbians to identify themselves with sex stereotypes by insisting that they call themselves cis is a little bit crazy, because that's ahistorical. It's never been the case. Maybe for some individuals it might be different, but by and large, for gays and lesbians have always been gender nonconforming. So this brand new framework that says if you relate to these gender stereotypes, you are therefore an oppressor. Well, how many here, doesn't matter if you're trans or not, how many of here feel like you are models of the gender stereotypes that match your sex? I don't think anybody feels that way. But what we have right now is a dynamic where we talked about incentives at the very beginning of this as we were warming up. All of the incentives right now are to identify on that trans scale, which, because the cost of it is only updating your pronouns, and the benefit of it is that now nobody can call you an oppressor or accuse you of having that sort of positionality where you're assumed to have power over someone else.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we just talked about how the window of time has been so very short that homosexual people in the US have had the full slate of civil liberties and legal rights and so forth, up to and including, marriage. I mean, that's been only a handful of years, really. So it makes a lot of sense that that there was not a lot of time for pressures to shy away from or feel ashamed of homosexuality to just have completely gone away, dissipated, not be there internally for, a teenager or a young person in college struggling with same-sex attraction, coming to terms with that. There are, as much as I see progress, as someone who came out as lesbian 20 plus years ago, I see a lot of progress. But I also am deeply aware of pockets and certain cultures and areas and families, etc., where it's not a whole lot easier now than it was 20 or 25 years ago to be homosexual. So that said, even though there's no cost in some of the ways that you're describing to socially transing yourself, I think if you are same-sex attracted and trying to go a even just social, not even medical trans route at the same time, I don't know how that can't conflict in the sense, and that it is never costless at that point, because at some point you've got to work through and come to terms with what your own basic sexual orientation is. And if you are female attracted to females or male attracted to males, you're postponing that, it seems to me, if you call yourself or in a way hide behind an identity that allows you to not deal with the homosexuality aspect of yourself, at least first, before. It seems like doing these things at least at the same time has got to be very, very confusing and counterproductive for growing up psychologically healthy and integrated with who you are and who you are in the world.
If I were a teenager now and had very similar experiences growing up, I would probably be interested in calling myself he, they. And I would say the same things that a lot of these other young people say, which is, well, I'm not like other guys. Or as the women say, I'm not like other girls. And use that as a way of differentiating myself from the men who I don't relate to.
Yeah. I mean, as a woman who has found the lesbian community in its various outlets over a couple of decades very, very valuable and very special, and I feel like I'm watching it disintegrate these days. What is hard about that is it just seems to be backtracking on. We're kind of at a point of you can be proud to be who you are. I mean, that was pride, right? I mean, whether you're marching and everything all day long every month of the year, set that aside. It's kind of a little overboard in that way, but there was a sense of you are who you are, and you can be proud of that, and you can walk in the world as who you are, holding the hand of the person you love, and we're going to have each other's backs, and we're going to walk this through society until that becomes a lot more okay. And if you back away into a she they, I just see that as, for young lesbians, kind of a backturning on wanting to even be part of a lesbian community anymore, because that's a different community, I guess.
Almost like if you're a gay woman, that somehow means that you're that cannot be a facet of womanhood. That has to be a facet of something else. The theyness, right? So it's like a concession that you aren't a legitimate participant in your sex if you have that thing that's different about you, and that you have to put yourself in a separate category. which is not right, which is not it's not good to teach people that they should other themselves because they have some attribute that's not typical for their sex.
Yeah.
I'm going to tweet that later.
Nice.
We have a couple of questions that have come in. I'm sort of interested in this one from Lori. Shall I address
affirming
this?
care?
Yes.
Yeah. What is your take on, from what you've looked at, being involved with organizations that are looking into this, etc., whether affirming care has been proven to prevent suicide?
I think that this is a really interesting question. First of all, I'm not a researcher. I am an activist, a patient activist, so I do have some expertise from that angle. And her name is right on the tip of my tongue, Olson Kennedy. For some reason, her first name's not coming to mind. Has been doing a longitudinal study of a group of young people that she's been transitioning for like 5 or 6 years now. And she released an update on this cohort recently that has been medicalized for 2 years. And I think that this very short-term research that she's done has shown that, I don't know if it's specifically about suicidality, probably not, but some of the comorbidities that are related to that, like depression and anxiety, are, I guess, like those measures are improved, and that this is a very short-term view of this particular cohort. We'll learn more as this group ages, but this was used as a rationale, saying, well, you can see transition helps. There's been a couple of other studies that are very short-term that show that relative to some other samples or populations that they're comparing against, that the youth that are getting a gender affirming care have some better numbers. Let me address that for a second. This is my view as somebody who transitioned. If you have a group of young people who are depressed or anxious, who feel neglected, who want attention, and who feel better when you're getting attention, who felt perhaps marginalized in the household because they were competing for attention with siblings, but now because they've transitioned, they're getting more share of attention from their parents, especially since those parents might have internalized this idea that their kids will kill themselves if they don't transition. They're getting more attention from their schools, from their classmates. I don't know that there's really a way that you can clearly remove all of those effects of the extra attention that child is getting from the effects that you're seeing in the very short term on transition. So I think there's going to be a lot of debate whether or not affirming care is proven to improve any of these mental health measurements, suicidality aside, because there's just no way to parse what part of any improvement that you see in the short term is related to the extra amount of care they're getting from being trans. And it's possible that if their other mental health conditions had been treated as seriously and treated as important as transition, it's possible that we would see those measurements increase also. So that's the short term. What we know about adult transitioners, I think this is a 2010 from the Dehaney study is that mortality among people who transition is greatly increased compared to people who don't. So there's a number of factors for that. One of the biggest mortality factors for people who transition are people like me. We just neglect to take care of our health. We smoke more, we drink more, we do drugs more. And when you have all of those high risk behaviors, have risky sex more, when you have all of those sorts of high risk behaviors, your mortality rate increases as well. But I think what we're going to see of this very young cohort is that as they reach adulthood and they're no longer getting all of the same sort of attention that they are from their care providers and their teachers and their parents, that there's going to be anything that we see that's positive in childhood, that's not likely to be sustainable into adulthood, because all of that support is eventually going to go away. That's a totally normal process. We call that becoming an adult. But if these young people are not learning the same sort of acclimation skills that we all have to learn as we become adults, I think that they're going to have a very hard time. Unfortunately, I don't know if fortunately or unfortunately, I could be wrong on this, but I think we're going to see as these longitudinal studies increase, that it's likely that these childhood transitioners are going to reveal that they have more adult-like patterns of higher mortality than their peers. That's going to be my guess.
I want to combine a couple of the questions that we got in and do it this way. As somebody working, what would your advice be to somebody working with college students in a college, emotional wellness or mental health setting, and you have a young person come in, they're gender non-conforming, not sure, without talking to them yet, what their sexual orientation history might be, but is there a need to slow down and sort out homosexuality almost versus or alongside or separate from gender identity for a young person like that coming in for help?
Yeah, I thank you, Candace. I saw a couple of questions like that too, and one of them I think was I've said in some of my writing before that if I had tried to understand myself as somebody who's same-sex attracted, would I still have transitioned? And it's sort of the same sort of question for young people today, which is it's a similar question. If you look at the sexual activity of, like, self-reported sexual activity of young people who are on this trans identity track, the degree to which they have relations with other people is way lower than their peers.
Yeah.
Which we're going through a trend right now where young people are having less sex anyway, but frequently the people who are identifying as trans or want to transition are having very little physical intimacy, and there's I don't want to jump into this completely right now, but there's also a lot higher correlation of people who are somewhere on the autism spectrum and identify as trans as well. And I think one of the things that we're seeing here is, and this applied to me when I was younger too, with what I'm about to say, is you have a generation of people who, for various reasons, whether it's because they just don't have very good social skills, which certainly applied to me, whether they're somewhere on the autism spectrum, which can also be something that presents some barriers to building those human relationships. Sometimes because you got to relate to people a little bit differently if you're on the autism spectrum. Whether it's because you've been inside for the last 2.5 years and mostly communicating with people over screens instead of in person, there's all sorts of barriers that might be in front of a young person to having that contact, physical contact with other people. So I would say it's really easy to imagine that if you transition, that's going to give you a lot of opportunities, but you don't change into another person by transitioning. So if you are already having difficulties forming human, like face-to-face relationships with people, transitioning isn't going to turn you into a social butterfly. So those types of skills that you need for relating to people and making friends and hanging out and telling somebody that you like them, that you're interested in them, that you want to have a relationship with them, kissing somebody, holding their hands, going a little further, having a sex with them. Like, these are all skills that you're going to have to, weird to call it a skill, but you have to learn how to do it. And that's going to, in fact, it's actually going to be harder if you transition than if you don't. So for young people who are not having any relationships, I think even if they still want to transition, what I would say is you've got to work on building up having these sorts of intimate relationships with people. And even if you do want to call yourself she, they, or he, they, or they, them, or if you do want to medicalize and transition, even don't go out and have surgery before you have sex for the first time. I can tell you from personal experience, that's not the right thing to do. Learn how to build a relationship with somebody and get to the point where you can have some comfort with intimacy as you are in your body, because you have to do, you have to have that.
With you, for your personal experience, is it fair to take away that it sounded like the vast majority of your discomfort with being male was, I'll say, social, as opposed to sort of an internal or inherent gender dysphoria about being a male body, having a male body? Like, if you were on an island all by yourself, would you still have hated being male? Or was it for you more the social, the expectations, and the, rubber hitting the road, with realizing who you were attracted to didn't make sense? But that's all about external interactions and relations with the world, as opposed to just an inherent feeling of severe discomfort with the body that you had.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because puberty is weird. I don't know how in depth I should get about this in this setting, but I think a lot of people who when you're becoming a more sexual creature, and you're going on from, you're changing from childhood, where you're mostly concerned about getting your homework done so that you can watch your favorite show on TV, right? Like, very, very childhood mindset, to a different mindset, which is, wow, I really wish that I could, be physically intimate with this kid I like. Totally different mindset. And when you start having those other thoughts that are sexual thoughts, they can be very bothersome. They bothered me quite a lot. And one of the reasons why I had that dysphoria is because I did not want to become that sexual creature. And so trying to repress that and stuff it down and remove it, which ultimately I did, I didn't have any way of dealing with that. And there was nobody who I could talk to about that either. I certainly couldn't talk to my father about it. And having that sort of subversion seems like a rational or reasonable way of approaching it when you don't have other healthy outlets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brings up another good question that we got in. Picking up on you had mentioned WPATH standards a bit ago. If a counselor, let's say, wanted to help a young person explore these dynamics that we're talking about, right? Do you think, from what you're seeing, that the latest WPATH SOC standards of care give enough flexibility to professionals to explore topics of homosexuality and gender identity and relationships and just explore the whole realm of what we're kind of trying to discuss here today, or do you think that the standards themselves are problematic in terms of, I guess, characterizing too much of that exploration as not affirmative enough, or not appropriate enough?
Of the new standards that were released in September, which is WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which releases their guidelines of transgender care. So this is the 8th edition, so I'll call it SOC 8. I have mostly read the chapters on adult transition and on adolescent transition, which I think are chapters 5 and 6. So my answer will pertain to those chapters, not the whole volume. You ask, does SOC 8 or WPATH, does that provide enough guidance to tell a therapist that they should explore these topics with their clients? The answer is yes. Now, the other part of SOC 8 is you could ask any question like, does SOC 8 encourage their provider or the clinicians to get people on a surgical track as fast as possible? Yes. Does it encourage people to take their time and go slowly? Yes. Like there are so many open-ended pieces of advice in the new standards of care that I really believe that any psychologist or therapist could read those chapters, go in with a mindset, and even tell themselves, I'm approaching these new standards with an open mind. What do they say? I believe the way that they are written is that whatever beliefs they carry into reading those, that they will have those beliefs affirmed, because there are so many open-ended and ambiguous recommendations and statements in the new standards of care.
That may not be the worst thing in the world. I mean, in terms of, if you're a counselor, let's say, and you're concerned with being able to show your employer and your licensing board that, hey, I comply with WPATH, I follow WPATH, that there's room in there to say this approach is in compliance, even if somebody else might have done it differently, and they could also end up saying my slightly different approach was also in compliance. That's kind of interesting.
It hardly works as a standard of care if any approach that you take is a valid approach. There's not a standard beyond saying do it however you want to. Anything goes.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to think of any recommendation in there that is anything better than just common sense advice.
I'm noticing that we've got are we down to 3? Are we down to a few minutes left till top of the hour? But for one thing, I really hope people go find your Washington Post article. It is so thought provoking and so impactful. One question that we got in kind of touches on this. I'm going to tweak it just a little bit and ask, if you would like to clarify your current stance on medicalized gender treatments for adults versus minors. The kind of what your stance currently is and why and where those lines are for you.
Well, with the release of the Standards of Care 8, what I believe is that the industry is trying to maneuver itself into a position where no gender clinician will ever have to be liable for any of the care they provide for anything. And because of that, and because of the vulnerability of the population that seeks care from the gender clinicians, at this point, I believe that surgery should be completely off the board for minors. That is the biggest change in my thinking. I continue to believe that for adults who are working with a therapist, who have a chance to talk about what sorts of traumas they might be experiencing, what sort of benefits and risks and liabilities that transition may entail, that if they can work all of that out, and that if a therapist agrees that their patient could be a good candidate, then I still think transition is maybe you should try other sorts of therapies first before going to it. It shouldn't be the therapy of first choice, but I would still say that that's fine for adults, because I do know adults who have transitioned that swear that they are better off. I don't know if that'll be just for today or if it's going to be forever, but I'll take them at their word, but not for children.
Legally, we have really bright lines, depending on, state versus federal and the context. Generally speaking, we have a pretty bright line. This is when you're an adult. Anything under that, and you're not an adult. Okay. All right. But what about the college age population? What about the kids the young people, I should say, the young adults, ages, let's say 18 to 22, right? Which is kind of the age that it sounds like you were when you made a lot of these medical commitments to transition. So they're 18, over 18. They are on the adult side of things. Informed consent, may very well be the preferred model at that point. I don't know. I mean, is that group? Are you comfortable with that age group, that 18 to 22, let's say, falling under your analysis of adult?
Well, I don't think informed consent is a good model for any transition. I think it should always be done while a patient is having some therapy and an agreement from a therapist that it's worth exploring for the patient. I don't think that this affirmation only model works for anybody at all in any circumstance. But I think at the same time that at some point you have to allow people to take their own risks and to choose things that might not work out for them. And if you say, well, it's 18, that's fine. If it's 21, that's fine. But if you keep pushing that age back too far, I think you risk having too much of a parochial mindset towards people, and you've got to respect their autonomy at some point.
Yeah. All right, well, we're at top of the hour, and this is, I think we've made our way through most of the submitted questions. And Corinna, this has been a really, really informative discussion. And again, On behalf of GenSpect, I'm Candace Jackson, and really appreciate the participants, the questions, the thoughtfulness behind them, and most of all to you, Corinna, for agreeing to join us and have these kinds of very insightful conversations that are going to help parents and college administrators and counselors and so forth. I think work with young people and young adults in a way that is truly going to be individualized and pursuing the best for each individual and what they're dealing with and struggling with as they grow up. So thank you very much for this discussion.
Yeah, it was great having this conversation with you, Candace.
All right, and we hope to see everybody back for the next installment in our GenSpect Fall Expert Series. Thanks again to Corinna.